What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right. So before I go further in this video, I want to give a shout out to Shannon for her contribution to the channel. All right. Respect to Shannon for showing love to this channel, and I want to thank everybody that has contributed to this channel in the past. Everyone who shows love to this channel, and those of you all who show love to the Patreon. I just uploaded a video to the Patreon about an hour ago, maybe a little bit less than that. Probably gonna upload something else to the Patreon before the day is through. All right. So this video, I want to debunk something, and what I mean by that, I just want to debunk this notion that super teams is something that just started. Super teams is not something that just started. We've had super teams damn near since the beginning of the league. Okay, back all the way to the 40s, early 50s, we've had super teams. Now, my definition of a super team is a roster with three Hall of Fame caliber players. That's my definition of a super team. In this video, I'm going to name mostly super team rosters that have won championships. Although there are probably going to be some that have, by definition, have had three superstar players that may not have won championships. I have to think about it a little bit. Usually, also by definition, these players are near their primes. All right. So that has to factor into it as well. But the one thing I will say is, look, it would be true if you would say that LeBron James helped to usher in the era where the culture was different, where players were interacting with one another and communicating with one another about teaming up. That's something you didn't see before. But then again, players didn't have the power that they have now. And the culture was different. So it's not fair to kind of put all that on LeBron's shoulders in this aspect. And also, really, to be honest about it, I think it's more the Boston Big Three that put pressure on this era to start the super team thing because of how it worked. Boston went from being a team that I think won only like 25 games a year before to winning 66. I think it's the biggest turnaround in NBA history for one season. And then they won the championship. It wasn't an easy sweep in the playoffs, but they won a championship. And they were one of the dominant teams in the Eastern Conference for about 5 years. So at the end of the day, it can be very successful, or it can blow up in your face. But anyway, I just want to name some teams that have won championships that obviously had, by definition, a super team. All right, I want to start first of all with the 1951 Rochester Royals. All right, won the championship that year. Now they actually had three Hall of Fame players on that roster: Bobby Wanzer, Arnie Rison, and Bob Davies. Bob Davies probably being the best player on that team. That's three Hall of Fame players. Now technically they had four Hall of Famers, but one of them, Red Holzman, is in the Hall of Fame as a coach, not as a player. So I don't include him on this one because he wasn't a Hall of Fame player, but he was a Hall of Famer later on as a coach, most notably with the New York Knicks and back, in the 1970s. But so this is a team that by definition was a super team. Three Hall of Famers on one roster. Now next I have the Minneapolis Lakers, who won championships in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Now this particular team has always had at least two Hall of Famers, but in the early 1950s, they actually had four Hall of Famers on their roster. That was Slater Martin, the best defensive point guard in the NBA at that time, Vern Mickelson, the power forward, Hall of Famer, George Mikan, the most dominant center in the history of the league up until that point, the most dominant player in the league up until that point, and Jim Pollard, who was the most athletic white player in the league at that time. That's four Hall of Famers plus a Hall of Fame coach in John Cundler. All right. So this is a super team, but people don't mention it because they don't really know much about this team or about that era. But this was a super team. All right. So next up, I have the 1955 Syracuse Nationals. All right. They won the championship that year. They also had three Hall of Famers on their roster. Dolph Shays, okay, who I did a video about the other day, top 10 power forwards. They also had Johnny Kerr, Johnny Red Kerr, a Hall of Fame center who played in the 50s into the 1960s. The first head coach of the Chicago Bulls in their franchise, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, if you grew up in the Michael Jordan era in the 1980s and 90s, he did color commentary, local affiliate WGN for the Bulls. Remember Johnny Red Kerr? He was a Hall of Famer. Is a Hall of Famer. Passed away almost 12 years ago now. And also on that roster, they had Earl Lloyd. Okay, he's a Hall of Famer. Now their coach also is a Hall of Famer, Al Servey, but not as a coach, but as a player. I just thought I would name drop him as well. So it's another super team by definition, right? All right. So next I have the 1956 Philadelphia Warriors. All right. Before I go further, look at this photograph. Go to the far right. Look at the dude wearing number 4. Doesn't he look like a young Phil Leotardo? I know I'm not the only one seeing that. I did 20 fucking years in the NBA. Not a fucking peep. I wanted to shoot the ball more. So I compromised. I patted my assist toes instead. You get where I'm going with this? Uncle Philly. Uncle Philly my ass. You don't get any tickets to go to the game. Nah, but this team right here, 3 Hall of Famers. Neil Johnston. It's the same deal. Neil Johnston, Paul Arizin, and Tom Golub. Okay? Same deal. Now, this is the most prominent example of a super team in the history of the NBA. The Bill Russell Celtic dynasty era from 1956 to 1969. All right? Um, fuck 3 Hall of Famers. Um, look, during that time period, you had on this team at any given time on the roster, you had, of course, Bill Russell. You had Bob Cousy, Tom Heinsohn, Andy Phillip, Frank Ramsey, Arnie Rison, you probably heard me talk about on an earlier team, Bill Sharman, Sam Jones, Casey Jones. Trying to see people who I might have missed. John Havlicek, Carl Braun, Clyde Leveillette. These are Hall of Famers he's played with on that franchise. Bailey Howell, and I think Tom Sanders was a Hall of Famer. So these are the people he played with on that team there in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I'm not trying to say that Bill Russell is not great. That's not my intention. But you do have to factor that in when you're ranking him. You know, that's my issue with people who have him as the GOAT. I'm like, do you factor in that he was playing with a team that basically had, it's like basically a team let's say the Kimbe Mutombo at center, but you got Steve Nash at point guard. You got his era Steph Curry at shooting guard. You got fucking Scottie Pippen coming off the bench as a sixth man. You know what I'm saying? You got goddamn James Harden at small forward. Come on, man. So, that's the most egregious example of a super team. Not to mention the fact that they got a top two all-time coach in Red Auerbach and probably the greatest executive in the history of the NBA. Him and Jerry West, the two greatest executives. It's the coach. Come on, man. Come on. Now, to beat a team that stacked would require a team that is, if not evenly stacked, is also impressively stacked as well, with players playing at a very, very high level. All right. And that's what happened in 1958 with the St. Louis Hawks. They had more than your standard three Hall of Fame caliber players. I believe they had four, starting with Bob Pettit, who was, in my opinion, the best player in the second half of the 1950s in the NBA. And yes, that includes Bill Russell. Um, they also on that team had Slater Martin, who you might remember me mentioning on those earlier Minneapolis Lakers teams. He was a little bit past his prime in this era, but he still was an effective player. I think he was like 33, 34 years old, which is kind of old for a player in that era. They also had Cliff Hagan, who was probably the second best player on that team, and they had Ed McCauley, all right? And they also had Alex Hannum, who's not in the Hall of Fame as a head coach, but I think he was a damn good coach for that era, okay? And it took, you see this picture right here, it took the best playoff game of his career. Bob Pettit scored 50 points in the deciding game for them just to edge out the Boston Celtics that deciding game. If Bob Pettit had an average game, maybe 26, 30 points, Bill Russell, the Celtics would have had 12 championships instead of just 11. I'm using air quotes saying that. All right, so next I have the 1967 Philadelphia 76ers. All right, so of course the best player on this team was Will Chamberlain, obviously a Hall of Famer. You also had on this team Hal Greer, first ballot Hall of Famer, Billy Cunningham, who was also a first ballot Hall of Famer, and you also have Chet Walker, who's a Hall of Famer. So this team had four Hall of Famers. Also, that coach I mentioned for the 58 team, the Hawks, Alex Hannum, was the coach of this team. And I believe the general manager of this team was Jack Ramsey, who would later win a championship as the head coach of the 1977 Portland Trailblazers. So to beat, this is only the second team to beat Bill Russell Celtics, and this is one of the greatest teams in the history of the NBA. This is considered the greatest team of the first 35 years of the NBA. So, you know, also another reason why I'm making this video is to debunk one other stupid fucking comment I hear from a lot of young people, is that there wasn't a lot of talent in the old NBA. You didn't have super teams because, well, teams didn't have one or two superstars. It wasn't a star-laden league, which is bullshit. If you notice, you you didn't really hear a lot of complaints from other franchises because probably every team had at least one or two stars. The thing is, to win championships in this era, you had to have three, maybe four championship caliber players, or four all-star players, or whatever the term you want to use. Um, Stars were really plentiful in this league, you know, especially as you got into the 1960s and onward. All right, so I don't want this video to drag too long, so I'm gonna try to speed through this a little bit. 1970s Knicks, you had I think five Hall of Famers. You had Willis Reed, you had David Busher, you had Bill Bradley, who I don't think should be in the Hall of Fame, but he's in there. You had Frazier. Plus the head coach, Red Holtzman, who you might remember I said was a player on the 51 Rochester Royals. He was a Hall of Famer as a coach. Then you have the 72 Lakers, Will Chamberlain, Jerry West, Gail Goodrich. All three of those Hall of Famers. It's a super team by definition, right? Um, Trying to speed through this a little bit. 1980s, you have the Lakers with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, James Worthy, all Hall of Famers. They had Bob McAdoo earlier on coming off the bench. He's in the Hall of Fame, as well as Jamal Wilkes. And, of course, the Boston Celtics. You have Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale. Earlier on, they had Nate Tiny Archibald as the point guard, Hall of Famer. Then later on, Dennis Johnson, the Hall of Famer. And then, of course, in the 80s, 86 and 87 seasons, they had Bill Walton coming off the bench as a Hall of Famer, six man. Even the Detroit Pistons technically had a super team when you look at it because you had Isaiah Thomas, Hall of Famer, Joe Dumars, Hall of Famer, Dennis Rodman, Hall of Famer, eventual Hall of Famer, and Adrian Dantley, Hall of Famer, and a Hall of Fame coach in Chuck Daly. You know what I'm saying? So that's a super team. Chicago Bulls, we all know that those guys are. You know, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman. I think starting in the '90s, though, you started seeing a little bit more parity. Even though I know the Bulls won 6 championships, but you didn't really see 3 stars on one team as much. You saw more or less 1 to 2 stars on a team, and you saw like a lot of really good players. Um, Parity was a lot better in the '90s for the most part. Um, for the most part, not saying there weren't bad teams. An expansion did make things a little bit less competitive, but you didn't really see 3, 4, or more superstars on one team. You know what I'm saying? Um, that's something that kind of you start seeing more just duos, and that's why it was so notable when the Milwaukee Bucks had that team in 2001 with Sam Cassell, uh, Ray Allen, and Glenn Big Dog Robinson. But the revival of the Big Three, to me, in my opinion, came in 2006. Excuse me, 2007 with Paul Pierce and the trade they made for Kevin Garnett, and then acquiring Ray Allen. That to me ushered in this era of the Big Three that influenced LeBron James and put pressure on LeBron James to help to create a Big Three with him, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. And then since then, we've seen um, this copycat league that it is. People trying to do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we've seen people say, hey, this is kind of hurting the NBA as far as parity is concerned with the Warriors of the, I remember a couple of years ago, I remember I reacted to it too, saying I wasn't going to cover the NBA no more. When after already acquiring Kevin Durant, and you have future Hall of Famers and Curry and and of course Klay Thompson and that fake Hall of Famer Draymond Green, then they acquired DeMarcus Cousins, who at the time you gotta remember he was just coming off of being a 27 point, 12 rebound guy. So you're thinking to yourself like, okay, man, look, you know, why even have the season? But of course, we've also seen Big Three with LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love. People can say what they want to say about Kevin Love, but guess what? He's a future Hall of Famer. All right. So that's the trend that we see now in the NBA. it seems as though if in order to win a championship, you either have to have a big three or at least maybe a big two surrounded by a lot of really good pieces. That's kind of like what we see now. You see that with the Lakers. You see that with other teams. But basically, I made this video to just debunk this notion that there were no big threes, before this era or before the '90s. That's bullshit. Tell me what you guys think.